Guys, I'm shaking that we had to stop at this point. We have to continue right now. Please, I'll come back. I'm waiting for you. I have to know how it's going to continue. Please, 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 I'll get here. I just need to know here.
Hey, I'm with you again.
Yeah, let's just continue. Nothing happened.
Since you can't see me anyway, I'm going to go grab a little lamp because I think this is rather antisocial. But we're still together because I have you on my AirPod.
Oh, great.
So I'm eagerly waiting to continue that discussion, particularly because we ended on an Olivier Letrie cliffhanger, which isn't fair to him. And he's one of the artists I admire the most, so we need to finish the thought.
To finish his sentence, yeah.
Yeah. Well, what I was trying to say, and I'll just get it on the record. Hopefully you can see me a little bit now. This may be kind of Vincent Price-esque lighting. Well, what I was going to say is, oh, that's creepy. Oh, well. You know, if I want to hear Olivier Letrie play Messiaen, I will listen to Olivier play. I don't have any great investment in listening to somebody who's trying to sound like him. And one would think that the person trying to sound like him would realize that that is a fool's errand. You're never going to play Olivier Letrie's Messiaen. Just let him do that and listen. And don't try to be that. And so, you know, that's again, it's the argument for independence of thought and for independence of style and development of style. So I don't know. But yeah, in general, my disappointments are my own. My great disappointment is my own feebleness as an artist and my own lack of character in situations. Yeah, I mean, I have many regrets and mistakes, but that's okay. You know, and you have to sort of get over it at some point.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for mentioning so many things that I'm thinking now. Okay, we have to move on to the next question because look at this. Look at all this, guys.
Oh, let's get through it. Yeah.
Questions.
There's got to be some good ones in there.
You guys have questions. We had the next question about because the organ is obviously we all feel the difference between the halts, between the organs, but do you feel the difference between the audience you're playing for?
Oh yes, yeah, definitely.
Is it important for you?
Very much, yeah. But what's also very important for me is to try to really remain free of judgment and prejudgment of any kind about the audience. And it's become an internalized thing for me where when I'm on stage, it's not that my eyesight changes or anything like that, but I just kind of psychologically actually don't really see them. Mm-hmm. I know there's people there. The darker the concert hall, the happier I am. I'm not the world's most socially comfortable person. I have a lot of social anxiety and ASD and so on. And so I'm perfectly happy to be alone on stage. The more people are on stage, the less comfortable I am. So the ratio, as Glenn Gould said, of audience to listener, or of artist to audience 1 to 0. The recording environment is great. But,
yeah, what Glenn Gould did, yeah.
Yeah, but the audience is there, must receive ultimate respect, but also has to be respected intellectually in the sense that, while in the broader sense you must try to please, you're there to please them and serve them. You're not necessarily there to pander to them. And you have to trust yourself to know best what is best for the audience. And that's what they will sense that and build, the trust will build. It's not just in the pieces that you play or the order of the programming, although there's a psychology to it that's important. And it's, you have to show respect just for, the fallibility of human nature or whatever, just as the same way as if you were served, to make a very stupid example, if you were serving a nice dinner party, of course you could start with dessert, of course you could start with whatever, but the way that you did that would influence one's perception of the evening, and so it's just a matter of choices. But yeah, you better be very aware of the feel of the audience, the dynamic. I try to learn as much about the places that I'm playing. Now, playing in China is a very interesting experience. Playing in Japan, very different than playing in the United States, very different than playing in England. Playing in Russia is, as you know, is a very special experience. Actually, not to be political about it in any way, but I have to say playing for a Russian audience has been one of the amazing experiences. Playing at the Great Hall in the name of Shostakovich in St. Petersburg, and playing in Moscow at Dom Muzika, and also at Tchaikovsky, and now also at Zaradye. We had the...
did you play?
Yeah, we had the touring organ there. And so, and the touring organ was at the Great Hall in the name of Tchaikovsky in St. Petersburg, 2 winters in a row. That was one of my greatest playing experiences. Every seat full. It sounded like the building was empty the way people listened. I mean, it was except that it was electricity in the air. Great place. And then playing in America is also a different world. You know, in America, one has to be, at least I think, a kind of MC. The audience needs you to hold their hand and bring you through the program. But yeah, it's always a different experience.
Yeah, talking about the public in Russia, because we have a very different relationship to organ music. It's not something which we have in the church and we go there every Sunday.
That's right.
Here it is.
That's right.
So it's a very big event when someone is going out to listen to the organ. It's very popular here. Yeah,
absolutely. You can think of one of my most important early playing experiences when I was 12 years old. In 1993, I believe, I played at the Dome Cathedral in Riga. You know, we all know the great Walker. I guess it's 1884, 1886 Walker. Yeah. And there, of course, since the Soviet regime, the pews, perhaps you've seen, have, you know, reversible sides. So you can set the whole building so that you're facing the altar, and then you can reset it to face the organ, which they
we have it here too. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah,
great.
It's really
I like this. Yeah, I like this Soviet method.
It makes a big clack, and then you can listen to the. You can face the orchestra, or you can face the organ or priest. Yeah, it's really fun. Okay, we'll go on to the next question, which I really like. Is, are you going to publish your composition?
Yeah. I mean, possibly eventually. Yeah. I used to be very arrogant and had no problem writing pieces, and then about 8 or 7 years ago, I got a big crisis of confidence and just stopped composing entirely, and got pretty depressed about it. And now I've kind of come around again, and I'm starting to assemble stuff. And I've kind of by figuring out that you know, I should simply drop the usual ambitions of a composer or of an academic composer or a person who wants to be a great composer. My role, you know, if I could do a Percy Whitlock sort of thing where I was, you know, just wrote miniatures and transcriptions and stuff, that would be enough, you know. And maybe in that I can develop something bigger. I've done a lot of transcriptions that I would like to publish, but I do have quite a bit of material of pieces. I think somebody did ask about the Serenade and Fugue on BACH. I am kind of proud of that.
Yeah.
That will eventually be published. The problem is when you're publishing something called a fugue, the name of BACH, it better be right. And I have a little, you know, I have problems with that fugue because, you know, structurally it doesn't really follow the fugue form that nicely. And you know, it seems kind of sad that, you know, in other words, when I'm working on it, I'm forced to confront, of course, my lack of abilities contrapuntally in the face of the great master. But at the same time, it's something, again, it's kind of the Martha Graham rule, you know, where she had, I'm paraphrasing it, but basically, you know, whatever Martha Graham used to say, essentially, whatever your creative force is, the way that it articulate, you know, the work that you articulate with it is your own. And if you do not bring it into the world, then it, whether original or not, it is lost with you. Yeah. And so, eventually, the nice thing about publishing is you can just take your time. Nothing will be published before I'm 40. It will probably take a few more years to start to see anything presentable, because the pieces that are published are ridiculous. I mean, poor Edition Peters that have invested all that money in printing up Aria, an unplayable piece, which is absolutely not worth the effort, and you know, seems to be innocuous enough until you turn to the last page and realize that it's impossible. Or for instance, Music for Imaginary Film. Really, it should never have been published. That was a piece that was written to demonstrate the touring organ, and as such, it could only be played on the very most big, well-equipped American organs anyway. And I mean, I wouldn't. The problem is, if you're going to write a piece, you'd better be able to defend the effort that someone else, justify the effort that somebody else will have to put into it. And I guess one of the reasons I haven't published more is because I'm so critical of, and generally, you know, negative about what we call new music and that movement. I don't care to spend my time, and it is not my passion to examine works which are new. It's not to say that they aren't good or couldn't be good, but I like the music for the most part, and it's one of those bizarre things about me that I'm, you know, for whatever the reputation is, I'm actually more conservative than most people in some ways. I like my music to have been road tested for at least a good 75 years before I put in the time. You know, I'm nobody's guinea pig. I'm not interested in composers who want to experiment with the organ through me. It's just, that's, you know, there are players, great players who have made great careers out of that. And more than once, I've said to composer who wanted to do that, please call Iveta Apkalna. She will do this for you with passion and with honesty and integrity. She'll probably memorize it, and she will do it much better than I ever can. Do not waste your new composition on me and my commercialism and my disregard. It's again, it's just, it wouldn't be ethical, really. So as a composer, of course, I have to face that too. And I want to be sure that anything that I publish is worth the time, say, of a student who might be foolish enough to try to learn it. And for the things that we've published, it really isn't. I wouldn't recommend that anybody put in the work to learn Music for an Imaginary Film, because the work simply doesn't deserve it, and it will waste a lot of time that could be spent on better music. But eventually, hopefully, I'll have something better to offer, yeah.
I didn't expect this answer from you. I actually really surprised by your attitude towards what you're doing. Because
well, no, I mean, you have to understand that an important part of being a professional musician is not just self-criticism, but a certain sort of, I guess it comes with age, maybe. I hate to say that, but, you know, a certain, I find, a certain kind of realism settles in. You know, after just so many hundreds of nights alone in a hotel, on the road after playing for people, you know, you begin to realize that there can be a certain unpretentiousness about it, and of any artist who has had more pretentiousness in their personality and in their public actually a rather misrepresentative public persona. A lot of the public persona that was put out in my early days, for instance, with Sony, has actually almost nothing to do with who I really am, and conceivably did me quite a bit of damage. So, you know, I like to try to be a little bit, this is actually engineering work and business work. And the inspiration and the ascendancy and the transcendence hopefully comes during the performance. But, you know, there's a lot of assembly line that has to go, you know, a lot of kitchen work. You just have to get the keys down for thousands of hours first. So might as well be real about it.
Yeah, to say true, I much more prefer this type of talking about the musician's life than, as Carpenter said, music is the language of the angels, and
yeah, what Carpenter said. Poetry. I mean, okay, yeah. I think Theodore Carpenter can. I love Theodore, and we were on the same label for a long time, but you know, I mean, this is a marketing statement. I don't need to be told that anything about angels or anything else. You know, and I also don't particularly need another glamorous young conductor telling us what the ways of music in the world is. I don't particularly need a conductor telling me much about making music, to be real honest. I have a lot of great conductors who I've worked with. I have many great conductors that I've learned from. I once had an organ lesson in Alice Tully Hall with Kurt Mazur, which was a life-changing moment. You know, I have great respect for great conductors, but let's remember that they don't make a damn sound. They don't. Okay.
Yeah,
I'm saying they're not musicians, but whatever they are, they're not making any sound.
Yeah, they have a different job. It's true.
Yeah, it's a certain job and it's a certain position, but let's keep our assessment of priorities and positions just a little bit more down to earth. So
let's move to another topic, which
let's do that.
I think there were like 5 or 6 people who wrote this question. How much do you work out? Why is it important to you? What do you do? And this is completely
you mean physically?
Topic. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well,
like,
okay.
I mean, everyone wants to know that. It's a completely different theme, but it's been mentioned a lot.
Okay, sure. Well, it's yeah. I mean, it's an honest question and it deserves an honest answer. How much do I work out? At my best, I generally work out about 5 days a week, and it's a discipline which is important for me because it's relatable to the practice discipline, but it is also an escape from practice. I'm not like most musicians, probably not like you, and certainly not like, I think, Thomas or some of my other musician friends who seem to take no greater joy than immersing themselves in as much music as possible all the time. This may be a bit because I'm starting to enter, like I said, the period in my life where I'm kind of a road-weary, middle-aged musician now. But actually, after the work of my current life, you know, the way that music requires a certain amount of work in my current life, and also the fatigue level of the maintenance of the non-musical work of the touring organ, logistics-wise and insurance and housing, all this stuff. The toll that takes is that generally after that work is done, after the musical work of the day is done, I want nothing to do with music. And generally I don't listen to music. I just don't really listen to it. I don't listen to classical music. I don't listen to popular music. I do music. When I do music, it's at the keyboard, and you know, maybe a little chill wave, lo-fi study beats from YouTube or something, but literally not more. I don't listen to music for the most part. I just don't have contact. I don't want contact to music outside of work. It's not that I don't enjoy it, but I just don't feel the need. And I also need to save the enthusiasm and the energy that I have for music, for the work that I'm playing and for the concert work. Yeah. So I kind of have compartmentalized my life a bit. And that was another thing that will happen with the concert career. But the energy that goes, you know, the escape from that is also found in the gym, where I can then go into the gym and put myself very, very deeply into something which also, like practice, is, okay, it's a bit narcissistic because you do it alone for yourself. And while we're on the subject of that, I said that an honest question deserves an honest answer. And it's not so much that I'm trying to be super exposed or honest. It's just that I wouldn't insult anyone's intelligence by assuming that they didn't already know this. But of course, I'm deeply insecure about my physical appearance. This is not a secret. If you look at the way that I've portrayed myself over the years, and the many years before my father died of cancer, I had no problem spending 45 minutes a day on my hair. And there were several years where I had absolutely outrageous hair, and I'm glad that I did. But I will never go back to that, because when my father died, I said that kind of part of my life changed, and probably it was a very good thing that it did. And in many ways, probably partly because I was homeschooled, which was a great thing, but and also because I was a different kid and a prodigious kid, I didn't really have, I never really had the childhood or the high school life, or it's not that I didn't have a wonderful childhood. I certainly did, but and a great childhood, actually, no complaints at all. However, I wasn't socialized with popular music or popular culture in any way, really, until I went to New York, because the 4 years that I would spend in high school, when other people were doing high school things, I was in the library transcribing, and I was at the organ, and that's, thank God I was. For me, I wouldn't have a career now if I didn't. But really, it wasn't until I moved to New York in 2000 that I really started to discover popular music, and then I suddenly was sucked very deep into the club culture and club kids and all of that. And but in the end result, you know, part of my experimentation, both with gender and with my sexuality, has, you know, received some rather, you know, there was a time when I was quite public in interviews and also in my appearance about my sexuality and about things like that. And just, you know, not even so much the sexuality side, but, you know, the way that will manifest in the way that a person looks or the way they express themselves. And that's one thing that's kind of come more conservative now in the last few years, and I'm happier that way now. But generally, I need to feel secure in my body to be able to appear in front of people, whether it's online or on the concert hall stage. If I've ever cast aspersions, as I fear that I possibly have in former interviews, making statements about what the audience wants to see and how people should look, that's also that's been a mistake, because I don't want to. I shouldn't cross the line of trying to describe what anybody should look like. All I can say is for me, ascribe it to narcissism or personal insecurity or whatever you want. Probably it's a mix of those things. Not all of those things are attractive things in a character, I realize, but the reality is that I'm extremely driven to stay in the best shape that I possibly can. It's not necessarily for health reasons. If anything, it's probably a little bit unhealthy. But it is still an expression of who I am, and it's a personal, confidence builder for being able to present myself in any kind of a stage. Really, that's pretty much the truth.
What I wanted to, first of all, thank you for your honest answer for this very honest question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure.
And wouldn't you say that, from my experience, as you say, we are all those people who just enjoying ourselves, spending time on the organ, or just digging into the scores. From my experience, this is so important for mental health of a musician, especially as a student, for example, mm-hmm. to have a second, just a hobby, a different thing you're doing, which is different.
That's right.
Because if you're failing or not just happy with yourself on one side, you always can just not killing yourself for this and just have
well, and you know, part of the reason, I mean, I can't speak for anyone else, but being unhappy with yourself is a big part of being an artist, or trying to be.
Truly.
Not because it has to be, but because it just ends up being as the expressive work gets done and learned. And but yeah, I mean, to put a more positive note on it, again, I can't speak for anybody else, but I definitely suggest that anybody who's serious about music definitely develop something else where they can get away from that, because it'll help the music making, you know. And the other thing is that personally, when I'm in the gym, my brain gets highly stimulated, and then I will tend to have other musical ideas or improvisation ideas or something that I can just save that for later, or I realize, that I'm not playing that fast enough or too fast or whatever, you know.
Yeah, I think actually many people will agree with you on this. And
whether they do or don't, that's my position. So.
We'll go on to our list of questions because time flies with you like incredibly
Well, that's
fast.
because I won't shut up. So let's do shorter answers.
Oh, please don't. We have a question, actually from Sebastian Heindl.
Sebastian, great player.
Yeah, amazing guy who has been at the organ talk.
Great player,
yeah.
Really great player. There's an example of somebody who's a great talent from a very young age. I relate to that side of him, where he started very young. And it's still so young. I mean, it'll be amazing to see what he brings to the world of the organ.
Yeah, truly. And he asked, what is your favorite composer and what is your favorite organ composer, apart from Bach?
Yeah, well, that's just to answer in reverse. No need to say apart from Bach, because though I could not really live as a musician without the work of Bach, he is far from my favorite composer.
Okay.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
I mean, Bach, because that consideration is almost irrelevant with Bach. For me, Bach is closer to mathematics, sunshine, or sunlight, photosynthesis, the cosmology, the organization of fractal structures in the universe, and so on. It's an incontrovertible reality. It's like gravity. I also describe Bach a bit like the sun. Sometimes I can make an audience giggle a little by saying that Bach is like the sun. It's absolutely required for human life, and sometimes you get burned. And that's Bach to me. But Bach is not, you know, I don't listen to Bach for fun. No, my favorite composer by far is Percy Aldridge Granger. So 1881 to 1961, the Australian pianist composer. I relate deeply to Granger in many, many ways, also in both his good and bad aspects. And in sexuality issues, Granger was way ahead of his time in many, many ways. He collected folk song before Bartók, but he was also an excellent amateur photographer, writer, linguist, a problematic linguist who take, unfortunately, rather racialist views of language and some other things, although I believe that he was fundamentally a humanist. And in my view, a wonderful composer who's also misunderstood because he's remembered generally for these irrelevant little pieces, when in fact there are greater works that are just not known. And he was a very complex person in terms of his sexuality, and also his ideas about morality and the social structures of life and love and how things can be arranged. Granger's very important to me. His harmonies and his sense of melody influenced me tremendously. So I would definitely say Granger. And then for an organ composer, it would be probably less, in a way less unusual an answer, because we would all know them. I mean, Dupré, Demessieux, Vierne have influenced me a lot. Not in the way that they would influence a person who, like yourself, maybe studies in France and stuff like that. You know, perhaps you hear it on some of my Vierne from the Rudesheim audio that I shared with you. My Vierne is just, you know, it's very, very differently approached, and not through the usual ways, and perhaps unappealingly to some, but those, you know, the idea of the fantasy pieces, you know, for me places Vierne kind of on a Rachmaninoff level in some ways. Whereas Demessieux, you know, the great achievements of the possibilities of technique, Dupré, the great gray stone wall of academic study and of methodology, and yet not without inspiration. There's still inspiration in there. But also, ultimately, I would come back to Edwin H Lemaire, the great Edwin Lemaire. In my view, there's evidence to suggest that Lemaire was probably the greatest organist since Bach in some ways. I would put Lemaire above Dupré, even though Dupré is unquestionably a greater composer. Lemaire as a composer is very corny and sad, and almost, well, not sad, and he's a wonderful composer, but his music is a kind of dead end, the original stuff. But his understanding of the organ's technical possibilities, especially as electricity was emerging in the art of organ building, places him way out in front.
Oh, it's interesting. It's a great answer. No one will, I think, I will rarely hear his name by now, Lemaire.
That's a big problem. And anybody who thinks they are going to play transcriptions had better learn the Lemaire. And that's not to say Lemaire's transcriptions are flawless. In fact, very frequently you can tell that Lemaire is from the pre-radio era. That's why I use my own Meistersinger transcription and not his. He reaches some of, I mean, for that piece particularly, there are of course solutions that are suggested by Wagner that are natural, but there are many things missing from those transcriptions which would seem unusual to leave out now that we have access to recordings. But in his day, they didn't.
Yeah, true. It changed a lot, actually. Yeah. And talking about your recording at Rudolfheim and this amazing project, what made you, how did you decide on this program, on the choice of pieces?
Well, I mean, a couple of those pieces are, one of them is repeated from the similar thing that we did at Konzerthaus Berlin, which was the March Heroica Brewer. But that's, in this case, we're talking about a project that will be released on August 16th, and then will stay on one of the major streaming platforms as a video production concert for a year, and will be heavily, heavily promoted. And so because of that, I needed to know that the program that I was going to be playing would be something that I could do more or less flawlessly and to my own level of satisfaction, because it had to be shot as a live event. So there are no retakes. This was no editing. So that's kind of unusual. That's what makes it a watchable concert. But I really, because we would have such a fantastic acoustic and installation for the organ, I really wanted a program that would show off the organ so that it could be a documentation. And I wanted the Meistersinger in there because it hadn't gotten the, and then I wanted the chance to do the Franck second chorale on my organ in a serious fashion in a big acoustic. It was just a combination of things.
Oh, it's now a question for me, because I was wondering why did you pick the concert house for the recording? Why you the recording there?
Well, it's not so much that I picked it. It looks on the outside that I chose it, but the reality is, these things generally come as fully formed opportunities which you either accept or deny. It's a little bit like when pre-corona, when I would announce a concert tour, the first thing that would happen is people would say, well, why aren't you coming to Sioux City? Or come to Detroit, the reality is, I don't get to choose where I go. You almost never do. Those concerts are not initiated by the artist. The concert tour that you end up with is the amalgamation of where the business is, where you get invited, and where it makes sense to go. And in the case of the touring organ, where the truck is going. Because then you'll get the dates, and then dates will be filled in along the route and stuff. But as the artist, at least at my level, you just don't have an influence over that.
Yeah, I didn't know that with the recording it was the same.
Sure, exactly, yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Well, and sometimes you get lucky. Like we did the Concert House event, and then because of Corona, we were able to also make the Goldberg-Hansen album. So that comes out, recorded at Concert House. Do you realize I could never have afforded to rent Concert House? That recording would never have been made if it weren't because of coronavirus. Terrible to say, but it's true.
Yeah, but I was wondering, because the acoustic at the Concert House is quite dry. That's why I was.
For me, it was absolutely perfect. And you have to remember, too, that we installed the organ in a very large area at the back of the building because we didn't have to have an audience. All the seats were removed, and no one was in the hall, and all the fabric was removed.
Oh, it changed everything.
Oh, I think it's like 3.5 seconds. And, I'm always a little bit better with a little bit shorter acoustic. Like Rudolfheim is a nice acoustic, but I don't want to be drowning in acoustic because I play very pianistically, and I want the clarity for the inner voices.
Yeah, I see. Can we cover 3 more questions?
Let's do at least.
At least. Oh, we have much more. I just watching on the time.
Yeah, let's push through as many as you can. I'll try to stay short now.
Okay. It's a question coming from Siberia, actually. The question is, music is oftentimes compared to the architecture. And do you have a favorite style in the architecture, or you have a favorite city or place you never want to live because it was so beautiful?
Oh, well, that's fabulous. I generally no, because I don't consider myself aesthetically sensitive or even simply educated enough to really make any judgment about such things. I mean, I'm like anyone. I know what I like, and of course, I most of my tastes in non-musical matter, I suppose in music too, are really pretty common. Actually, I mean, if I go to Naples, if I go to Italy, I love. Of course, my jaw's on the floor the whole time. Personally, I also love, and people can't believe it when I say this sometimes, especially in Europe, I'm absolutely in love with California, and particularly with Los Angeles. But who doesn't love Santa Barbara? this wonderful matching sort of 1920s thing. Who doesn't love, you know, or for instance, if you ever get to go to New Zealand, to Napier, the little town of Napier, New Zealand, which was basically built in one shot in the 1930s after a big earthquake, this fantastic Art Deco style. Or I also love strongly the sort of postmodern, you know, architecture of the 80s, Michael Graves and stuff like that. But again, I don't have anything really meaningful to say about that. For me, architecture and music are not all that closely related. Music has an architecture in that it has a structure, but music is on its own terms.
Sure. I mean, still so many people, because, you know, when you explain the ABA form in music, you say, oh, this is like an arch, this is like an architecture. So that's why it's, and or talking about the classical music and classical peers and the architecture. So it's, for me, being a student, for example, I've heard this all the time.
Yeah, I mean, but again, I feel like those are kind of truisms that make for facile presentations for a professor. A professor can rattle off a certain amount of that kind of material and appear very compelling.
Okay, moving on. What was the most complicated work you've ever played?
Well, I'm partially responsible for how complicated it was. I guess my transcription of the Scriabin for a sonata. That was pretty hair-raising. The Mahler, actually, in the end, of course, I felt that my Mahler transcription was a failure, actually, because it was by necessity, perhaps, more of a pastiche than it should have been, because one has to imply the work rather than play it because it's so complex. Again, there were some things I played when I was in school, when I was, you know, compelled to either play a lot of new music or ligeti and stuff like that. You know, I tried to. When I was in Juilliard, I played a lot of piano because I was trying to transcribe and I was trying to develop as a keyboardist. So, for instance, the Ligeti etudes, you know, Autumn in Warsaw and stuff like that. Wow, I'm very, you know, I'll never really return to that music. I'll let Thomas deal with that.
Yeah, Autumn in Warsaw is crazy. It's a brain splitter. Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. Or Let's Struggle of Life and Death, Messiaen. Yeah, I don't know.
I love him.
Oh, I do too. But I mean, you know, I don't know that that's I don't know that anyone's well served by my trying to play that music. You know.
Actually, I want to ask you, what do you think about this question? If playing the piano first, it's a necessary part for someone who wants to play the organ.
It's a dogma. It's probably generally right. It depends on the talent. I started both at the same time. For some people, it would be right. For some people, it would be wrong. There are also organists who never really play the piano. And to be fair, I don't consider myself to have learned to play the piano properly until after I graduated from Juilliard, because it wasn't until I left Juilliard that I met my main teacher in the later part of my life. And so, whose name is Miles Fusco, but he's an independent teacher. So in other words, no one at Juilliard. So, and not that I didn't have great teachers at Juilliard, but you know what I'm saying. So I didn't really learn to play the piano properly until later, comparatively recently. You know, you could make the argument that I also just spent most of my time with the organ. Yeah, it just depends on the person.
I have let's make the short question first. Did you use any special school or technique while studying, like Dupré school, whatever? Did you use any methods? No.
I mean, I studied a number of methods. I started when I was very, very young. I did use the Dickinson method. Oh, yeah. And then, you know, I gave a certain amount of attention to the Dupré method and the Dupré improvisation group. And then, of course, the Hancock. I did study with Jerry Hancock for 2 years, but I did not study improvisation with him. No, I mean, there's no method that compares to the Chopin etudes. I mean, even Hanon and Czerny and all of those things, all you really need are the Chopin etudes and the well-tempered clavier. And then, of course, when you can do it, the Goldberg variations. In those three groups of works is contained more or less everything you need to know about technique. And all you have to do is extend whatever seems logical to the pedal, and the benefits will accrue to the pedal. If you transcribe the well-timbered clavier preludes and fugues in some way, in whatever way seems to be most logical to you for the organ, you will learn things that cannot be taught by an actual teacher generally. And, you know, it's just do it old school. That's what they always used to do. It's the old apocryphal story of, was it Handel or Haydn or it doesn't matter, Mozart copying out, you know, Bach by candlelight. Well, that's actually what they did, because if you wanted a copy of something, either you managed to buy one of the few existing copies, or you simply made your own copy. Well, if you copied out these works by hand, which is what I've done in a small way by making transcriptions, it's the same thing. Then, of course, you absorb the work, and you kind of go through a little bit of walking the same path that the composer did when they wrote it. And so, you know, you just go with the classics. Play the Opus 10 of Chopin, play the well-tempered, play the Goldberg, and then try to play it on the organ, and the technique will come, believe me. You don't need to worry too much about, and of course, the trio sonatas and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Talking about transcriptions, actually, there was a question from Thomas Mellon. When you make a transcription of a piano work, do you write it out, or you play from piano score?
Well, excuse me, that depends on what the piece is and how serious it is and what it needs to be used for. If I need to put something together for a short television thing, you know, it'll be done from the piano score. But generally, the real transcriptions are all written out, and the Scriabin and some of the famous ones were written out by hand. The Rachmaninoff, the you know, like I said, the Scriabin, because the Mettner and stuff, because those things have to essentially be recomposed. So unless it's a fairly simple piece or highly idiomatic, then it pretty much has to be written out.
Okay, it's interesting. I was given by Louis Robillard his transcription of L'Île de Mort, L'Isle of Death, which is, I don't know how many pages, completely written by hand. This is impressed me a lot.
Actually, now that you mention it, maybe I'll do something. Maybe I'll put on Instagram. I'll scan in and put some pictures of the Scriabin transcription, because it was notated by hand, and it's a nightmare. I'll put it out. It's fun to look at, actually.
Yeah, and how much? You have a question. How much does it take to you to write it out?
What do you mean? How much does it take?
How much time? Yeah, how long?
Again, depends on the piece and the level of obsession. Generally, I will only transcribe a piece if I really become fixated on it, because I want to own it. There's a conquest aspect to it. You know, I want to have that. You know, so I have to write it out. Then you have a sense of ownership.
Yeah.
And by the way, then you know, if you write a piece out, you will remember it for the rest of your life.
That's true.
You know.
And let's get to a big question. It's actually about the so-called hybrid organs, or like chimera organs, which nowadays getting more and more popular. And not only the organs which have a pipe organ part and then organ samples, but also just those which have a MIDI keyboard when you can put in basically anything. And there is a question of this kind of, if we go further with this direction, it actually raises the question what actually an organ is, because if you use any sound, if you bring any sound you want, we can well say that Jean-Michel Jarre is an organist, or Kraftwerk as the organist. In your opinion, first of all, what do you think about the hybrids? And in your opinion, how far is too far?
Well, again, it will seem strange to some, because on one hand, seem to be this advocate for the digital organ and so on. But, you know, at the same time, I actually have, just as much as some would, about their kinds of organs, I have a certain purism about it, actually. And you can see it in the international touring organ, in the sense that, of course, I could have made it anything, you know. But what I really wanted it to be was an organ. And I just wanted it to be an organ that is centered strongly in the tradition of organs that I love the most. And of course, it has expansions into all sorts of areas, but the expansions are into areas which would be economically unlikely to occur. You know, you wouldn't have 96 note extension chests in anything but the most ridiculously well-funded pipe organ and so on. And so what I wanted was a completely comprehensive instrument, but I would be totally unattracted to even turn it on and play unless it had for me the magic that made me want to play the organ in the first place, which has nothing to do with MIDI and hybrid and all these weird considerations. Just by way of a quick side note, anyone who is just now realizing through the pathway of the suggestions of the hybrid organ that an organ can be anything has been asleep at the switch, because that has been true since hundreds of years, actually. The technology that is evidenced in the organs of Kavai Kol and Silbermann and all the historic builders, though we think of them as traditional and these great monuments, give me a break. They're monuments chiefly because they represent the application of emerging technologies. It's as true for the application of the Barker lever and the divided chests and the ventals and the divided pressures and the high pressure trebles of Kavai Kol and the orchestral voices and so on, as it is of the, excuse me, I think we may have lost my audio. It's as there. Yeah, you're there, right?
Yeah, I'm sure.
Okay. It's as true of the Kavai Kol as it is of the elegance of the use of energy, say, in a Silbermann organ, or the organ at St. Bavo, where, you know, just despite hundreds of years of course, maintained aggressively every single day, but, you know, multiple hundred years old machines, which are still able to articulate very detailed information at a highly accurate level, talking about them as a machine, not as an organ. In those organs is contained all the promise of the digital organ. The digital organ is required by those organs, in the sense that the things, you know, one of the reasons that the organs of antiquity are so important is that they embody, generally they embody hundreds of years before, say, Claude Shannon's definition of information theory and the binary system and the electrical relay, which gives us the computer. Before those things, mathematics had already given us their potential, and particularly in the binary system. And even old organs, any kind of organ is essentially a binary system. Of course, in a tracker organ, you can sneak the key down and get a pipe, and I don't care. It's still a binary system because that's not how we play. The way we play is note on off. It's a 0 or a 1. And so, you know, once you have the organ of the 16th century, 17th century, the pathway is laid to the digital organ. A quick note about hybrid organs, and a quick note about digital organs, just because it will be necessary in answering the question. I do not advocate for every digital organ or for all digital organs. I do advocate for digital organs in the sense that I consider it to be the great frontier of organ building. But by the same token, I feel that it's possible to show that the general pathway of the digital organ up to and through the present day has been one of cheapness and anti-artisticness, if that's a word. In other words, the potential of the digital organ has been largely squandered on greasy organ salesmen with cheap plaid jackets, who are the lower class cousins of used car salesmen, and who foist upon organists and congregations these worthless, sad, pitiful, frankly rather pornographic little excuses for organs, with plastic keys and all of the nonsense that goes on. So in general, I'm actually not much interested in the digital organ as it stands. There are, in my view, a handful of digital organs in the world that are great organs. I believe that mine is the greatest. I believe that that can be shown. Now, for some people, saying the greatest digital organ is a ridiculous contradiction in terms. But what I mean is, I want an instrument that's artistic. I don't actually particularly want something that came off of an assembly line, and that's like 1,001 of its exact cousins. And so, you know, and I don't, by the way, complain or propose that the digital organ is the ultimate solution to all organs. The longer I have the international touring organ, the more I feel that the digital organ is at its best when it is used to build an organ of that character. The digital organ is really best when it is sampled from and when the samples are used in the creation of an organ of the period 1910 to 1955 or so, the electric action American organ, because those organs are, the electric action organ is the most binary of pipe organs, of course, and that the production of those sounds is best suited to the digital system when it is properly arrayed, and it cannot be done on a budget. It has to be done at a very high level of cost, even though it's still fractional compared to the pipe organ. I don't particularly have any interest in a digital version of a Baroque organ. If we're going to talk about a Baroque tracker action pipe organ, that is the way to do that sound. It's not that it can't be done or emulated, but the best way to do it, and if I were to want to play that kind of an organ, I would look for a Flentrop or a Schnitger or what have you. And for that reason, I find hybrid organs to be totally uninteresting. I have not yet played a hybrid organ that I found even slightly satisfying. And in general, in the places where they occur, I actually feel that they would be better as fully digital instruments. Because the problem is, whenever you introduce the aspect of a hybrid organ, you are inhibiting the potential for success of both technologies. You're tying the use of the digital resources economically and for budget reasons and structurally in the design of the organ. Those resources will, of course, be arranged in a way which is totally secondary to the pipe resources and passive to them. But the pipe resources on their own will then set the tone for the potential of the organ. And there are no pipe organs that are ever as fast, action-wise, of course, or speech-wise as the digital organ. So it means the whole thing is hamstrung. No, the hybrid organ for me is an inevitable outgrowth of just the sales force of people who sell organs, and I don't begrudge them their work, but it's not an artistic path in my view. And by the way, I don't think the pipe organ is terribly well served. There will, of course, by hybridization, there will be large pipe organs that have digital stops. That is simply not my department, because in general, the pipe organ is something that I have a certain relationship with now, which is different than others. And if I were to go back and play pipe organ recitals, I would want to do it on probably the big historic organs, and maybe that will be a phase of my career later on. But yeah, the hybrid organ is not something I'm enthusiastic about at all.
Yeah. You know, Cameron, it's so, first of all, I think it will be so important if this idea would get out to people of your region, because in this case you will be understood so much better, because we are, so many of us are still living in this idea that you are kind of connected with the digital organs in general. And I think this is a very important statement, which we are guys really, it's, I think, very important for us to think about that.
Thank you, and thank you for the help that you're giving me by sharing your platform with organ fans and specialists, which does not constitute and hasn't constituted the majority of my audience, because I haven't cultivated that audience, because to me that audience is not a commercial end in itself. However, it's a group of people that I'm part of and that I care personally very much about. It's just that one cannot make a commercial career playing for organists. And so, you know, I haven't put the effort in to explain sometimes what I've ham-fistedly said in the media. I do believe very strongly that if you want to have a great technique, you need to work on the digital organ, simply because development of technique is largely about action. I mean, action of the organ. I could practice all day on an alien Skinner and not get better. I could practice all day on an EM Skinner. I could practice all day on a Fisk. And in my view, not get better. In other words, not develop and pursue the things technically that I would need to do to serve a concert audience at a high level and be able to play the way I like to play. It always seems to me a little bit foolish when people on one hand are willing to accept the attainments of my career or whatever they are, and even if they hate my playing, grudgingly accept my technique or whatever, and then on this, with the same breath, will turn around and say, but why does he like to play the digital organ? Gee, don't you think there's a connection? I mean, it's the digital organ that has enabled me to have the technique that I have. And it's not really something which falls, in my view, into the realm of dispute. One may like or not like that fact, but I would not play the way I play, nor would I have the opportunities I have if I had limited myself to practicing on the pipe organ exclusively. And when I see the pipe organs that are generally supplied to students, I'm horrified. Because you cannot develop a good technique on a slow-acting organ. And frankly, I would much rather play an organ with limited tonal resources and maybe not the very best colors and not much 8-foot tone and a lot of bass and no 32. I would take that organ in a heartbeat over a bigger, much richer sounding organ if the first organ had a sharp, fast action. The action is what gives you the rhythm and the articulation. That is what sets the proportions of the music. Without that, everything else is basically worthless. You could have the greatest tonal colors and so on, and if you can't articulate a triplet, and we've all seen organs like that whose potential is kneecapped by the action. I could tell you quite a few large organs that I've played that are exactly like that, where you get there and you think, what the hell is the hype about? I don't care how beautiful the flute is. If I can't get it to come on and off, and if I'm still waiting for the damn slider chest, then it doesn't matter what I play, because you're not going to hear it.
I maybe not completely agree with you on this point, but still,
and nor should you.
Technique. What I want to say is that the technique serves your goal, and if your goals are to create this kind of clarity as you get as a electric or digital organ or an electronic traction. Of course, it's
but I mean, Alexandra, but the fact is, it doesn't really matter what organ you're playing. Your life and your existence in time and in reality is subject to time and the passage of time and the structures of time, like everything else and everyone else. Ultimately, it doesn't matter how inspired you are or how good of a musician you are. You have to articulate a note, and you have to get an idea into a machine, and the machine has to get the idea out to the audience, and it has to occur on a timeline. That's how music is made. It doesn't matter. It's not about inspiration and artistic and so on. All of those things are important, but you still have to get the ideas to the ears of the listener. And those things have to be done in a way which is accurate to what your intention is. If the organ can't do it, you can't succeed.
Yeah, still the pieces are written. For example, if you go to a Berliner Dom, which has a search manual which is as slow as, I don't know, way slower than the first two. And you think, but these pieces were meant to be in certain ways played on this kind of instrument with this kind of problem. So may we just think of them as adjusting them to the instruments they were
but that's, in my view, that's just a secondary engineering workaround, because no organ builder would wish their organ to be that way. The fact that organs sometimes end up that way is often part of the reality of the way instruments get built, and the economy and the time and the technology available and the money that got spent and who was involved and whether there was a war on and all these other non-musical considerations. But the point is, E.M. Skinner, Kavai Cole, Schnitger, Silberman, everybody, they all went to their graves. They all went to their graves trying to provide us an action that was more precise, sounds that were more beautiful, swell boxes that didn't squeak, actions that were faster. Doesn't matter if it's Kavai, Cole, Barker, or anybody. Actually, they were all working towards the same thing, which is the attainment of physical perfection. And the degree to which they were able to attain that which cannot be attained in a world of friction and gravity is what makes those artists great, shining accomplishments. It's what makes them great Michelangelo level and Bach level artists, just as much as the players or the composers. But don't confuse one thing for the other. The existence of some intervening reality about the third manual of the Berliner Dom doesn't change the fact that Sauer, as a builder, would never have been Sauer if they didn't accomplish the things that they did, and they could not have accomplished those things. They could not have done those things if they weren't attempting to create the best possible engineering in the instrument that the technology of the time could allow. And that means that they were trying to get the best that they could get.
Yeah. We have 15 seconds, and I think at this point we just have to say thank you so much for taking 2 hours of your precious time to spend with us and actually showing us there is no black and white, but there is all this range of possibilities. Thank you so much.